Predation and competition, of course, aren't the only types of interspecific relationships that we can find. Communities can interact with each other in more positive ways, or sometimes less immediately deadly ways that are just as horrible if you're a parasite. And we call these relationships symbiosis. A symbiosis is a close, long-term, and persistent relationship between two species. And sometimes it's good and sometimes it's decidedly not. The word means living together, and that's what we mean by close and long term. It does not necessarily mean that one organism is inside the other one, although, again, parasites tend to do that. But some of our more beneficial things do that as well. But it doesn't have to be. It can also just be two organisms that have a mutually beneficial relationship that live in the same space as one another and help each other out. Symbiosis is always interspecific, and it's the result of mutual behaviors that have been driven by coevolution. And in some species, this is such a strong force that they literally cannot live without the other one. See Darwin's moth. The rarest type of symbiosis is commensalism, and commensalism's kind of blah. It happens when you have one species that benefits from a relationship and another one that doesn't care. So it's really not common in nature because there's oftentimes a reason that an organism tolerates another one or an organism is forced to live with another one. Some examples we have is that Arctic foxes often have a behavior of hiding amongst caribou herds. It doesn't hurt the caribou at all. Foxes aren't big enough to even take down their young ones, but what the fox gets is it uses the herd as a way to keep its predators from chasing it down, because the caribou will drive off anything that is big enough to take down the fox, because it could actually be a threat to the caribou too. Cowbirds are another example. These are birds that will hang out on the backs of bison or cows and eat the insects flying out of the grass as the herd animals walk through the grass. Doesn't really do anything for the bison. There are certainly mutualistic relationships where you have one organism eating pest insects off of another one, but these aren't pest insects the cowbirds are eating. These are grasshoppers and stuff that are minding their own business and just trying to get out of the bison's way. But as the bison walks through, they come above the grass level and the cowbirds pick them off. This spider is another example that I really like. Probably not going to last super long, but the gazelle probably doesn't really care that there's a spider web between its horns, but the spider gets a free ride and probably actually gets a lot of flies that get kicked up, just like the bison kicks up the cowbird, or the bugs for the cowbirds. Much more common and much nicer is mutualism. This is any relationship where both partners benefit. It's very common in nature. So you've got things like cleaner fish that will go around and literally swim into sharks' mouths, clean them out, and clean their scales, and they get a free meal. Shark gets rid of some parasites. It's a great relationship, and there's actually lots of predatory species that will let other mutualistic symbiotes do this, which you wouldn't necessarily expect of predators. Crocodiles are very famous for doing this with birds as well, and you will literally see pictures of birds wandering into crocodiles' mouths and just cleaning them out, and the crocodile is never going to bite down because the meal's not worth it. Getting rid of those parasites is way more beneficial. Our own gut bacteria are mutualistic symbiotes for us. They produce vitamins in our gut. They help us break down cellulose and other foods. They keep other nastier things at bay, and in return, they actually get a free meal out of it. It's not like a parasite that's just taking and taking and taking, they're actually getting food from stuff that we normally would not be able to digest. Nitrogen-fixing bacteria for plants, specifically legumes, tend to have these. Is another great example. They get nitrates from the bacteria that are turning nitrogen air into, or in the air, into the nitrates that you need as fertilizer, and in return they get lovely, lovely glucose that they can make ATP out of from the plant. And of course, we have the clownfish as well, which hide in the anemones famously and have developed immunity to the anemone's sting. So they can help keep away predators that would feed on the anemones, whereas the anemones keep away the bigger fish that would just get caught in their tentacles if they tried to go after clownfish. And then, of course, there's the parasites, which are the ones you should not Google. Actually, don't. There's nasty stuff out there. Parasites are the relationship where the symbiote benefits the one that's feeding off of the other one, the parasite, and the host gets harmed. So, if we're talking creepy department, this is where it is. Case in point, the fish louse, which is a gigantic lice that eats a fish's tongue and then takes its place and eats a bunch of the food coming into the fish's mouth. There's true nightmare fuel in this category, but it's actually really interesting stuff as well. This is where you get your worms, you get your tapeworms, this is where you get your scabies and your lice and your genital grabs. All of that creepy stuff. This is where you get your malaria as well. And the goal of the parasite is to keep the host alive as long as possible, but oftentimes these end up with really debilitating things. Sleeping sickness is a very, very dangerous disease that is caused by parasites. They'll keep the host alive, but they're keeping the host alive long enough for them to reproduce and pass it on to the next person and infect the next person. And if they are able to keep a host alive long enough to do that, they are successful. So oftentimes these things do end up killing people. Other thing to keep in mind is that many of these species can have more than one host, and in fact, they can have more than one intermediate form as well. So malaria in particular has a fairly complicated life cycle that requires both humans and mosquitoes, and we hate them for it. I don't know if the mosquitoes have an opinion, but we hate the mosquitoes for it too, so they might want them to stop as well.